You know, there's some interesting things about International Harvester. There's a lot of stories, a lot of things that aren't written down, but it is one thing about International Harvester during the Second World War and Canton plant is that we had a forge shop that made small forgings, very accurate forgings, and there was a lot of need for those type of forgings, and they were full occupied making those products for the war effort. One of the things that I really kind of get real close to is because of something I have here in my hand, but they made shell clips, all different sizes. The one that I have here, I think a lot of this, it was in a plant manager's office when I retired, and I wanted to make sure nothing happened to it, so I took it home, and since then I've donated it to the museum. But this is a shell clip, and it says, made at Canton Works and found on Anzio Beach on May 3rd, 1944 by Gilbert Fouts. Mr. Fouts had worked at International Harvester before going to the service and being overseas, and he was on one of the initial groups that went on Anzio Beach in Italy, and he found this shell clip sitting on the sand, put it in his pocket, brought it home, and gave it back to the plant. So I think that's quite a nice little story. Okay, good morning. Welcome to Canton-area Heritage Center. We're located right across the street on Main Street from the Graham Medical Group. And we're glad to see you here today. My name is Jack Pollitt. I'm the chairman of the museum. I have been in the past working on various levels at International Harvester, so that's probably why I'm going to lead you through Harvester P&O today. We're going to make a series of these presentations, and we hope they create enough interest for your increased attendance, and maybe you will even want to come in and help us. We'll appreciate that. Let me get started here with something that leads into International Harvester P&O room, but this is a series of 5 pictures that depict the foundry, the gray iron foundry that was International Harvesters. It was located along 4th Avenue, or the railroad tracks as they used to be called. And of course, in order to have a pattern, you have to start out with a pattern shop who makes the pattern, and then we go to the floor where the patterns are used with a board, a flask, and of course the sand. The sand is mulled overnight and is ready to make a casting. Next thing, of course, in making a casting, you have to melt the iron and put any additives to it. Let me speak a little bit about the additives. Back in the 30s and early 40s, there was a gentleman by the name of Ralph Beebe who was instrumental in helping develop nodular iron in the United States. It was big in Germany, but the difference between gray iron and nodular is the makeup of the iron itself. If you cut a piece of gray iron, the strands are straight. But if you cut a piece of nodular, put it under a microscope, and you'll see that the things are nodular, which makes it much stronger. Then, of course, you pour off the molten iron into the bull ladle. They take the iron and put it into small ladles who pour it off into the patterns. This gentleman here was well known and very well liked here in Canton. His name was Charlie Curtright, and everybody liked Charlie. Now we're going to step into the Harvester P&O room. One of the things that made Harlan and Orndorff very popular and made it very viable as an operation is that they were way ahead of themselves in making advertisements. And here in this glass case, you'll see a series of different items There were advertisements for P&O, and it worked for them very well. In addition, one of the second things that made them very, very desirable to big companies is that they had gone out and made distribution houses so that it all didn't have to come directly from the factory. It could go to the distribution house. The farmer had less room to go or miles to go to pick up his work. One of the things that I kind of like to show people about Harlan and Orndorff, and the reason I like to show this is I used it myself when I was young. And what it is it's a Canton garden plow, if you will. And we still have the advertisement on it. And here's a very vivid, nice illustration of what the plow was. But it was a very popular plow, but I don't think there's very many of them left. I'm happy that I was able to donate this to the museum. Among the things that are real impressive to me is these scale model plows, cultivator, and these were handmade by employees of International Harvester, and they are to scale. The one down here that's painted belonged to me, and it was owned by a neighbor of mine by the name of Dave Buchan. Dave was a member of a very big family, 8 boys and 2 girls. They all were very talented. Mr. Buchan, Dave Buchan, made that, and when he died, I got a call from his wife, or my mother did, and she said, "You'll have to come home, Mrs. Buchan wants to see you." So I went to their house. There she sat in her chair, and on the table beside her was that plow, and she said, "You played with that when you were young, and you were the only one that Dave would ever let play with it or touch it hardly." She said, "He told me to make sure you got that when he passed away." So I was very taken back by it, and certainly. If you'll see some pictures here, a picture, there's even a International Harvester group of engineers that check it out just for fun to see how authentic it was. And it was totally authentic, with the exception that the mold board, or the plow bottom itself, was a little larger. And the reason they said it probably was a little larger, they couldn't get the 38-degree slope that they looked for. And so to make it the 38-degree, they had to make it a little bigger. This picture also shows 3 members of the Buchan family, and the 3 of them together had 150 years of work, 58-year average apiece for P&O and Harvester employment. These were made by a gentleman by the name of Sam Buchan, and Sam was the youngest brother. He had 23 years with International Harvester, and when after his 23rd years, he retired and then opened a grocery store and ran a grocery store here in Canton for about another 20 years. So they liked work. They would also get together and build a house for maybe their sister, that type of thing. They had a sister who lived on Chestnut Street that lived in a little 3-room house. And later it was made into a 9-room house with a back porch and a big front porch. The reason I know that is my parents lived in that house. As we move around, we talk about the various things that are souvenirs and so on, and we talked about P&O, one of the things that they created a lot of. But the International Harvester was just as guilty, if you will, of making a lot of things as giveaways. And this case here has nothing but International Harvester memorabilia. When we closed the plant, this was upstairs in one of the storage areas, and it's actually a case to hold blueprints. You fold this down, a leg pops out. You want to look at a blueprint for building 121, you pull it up and lay it out. and you got a blueprint right in front of you each time. The blueprints are still in here. One of the things before, I actually didn't give it away. We gave it a year prior to the Canton Library. It's a model of the plant. And I remembered it, so I went to the library to get it and to see if they would let me have it. And they said that they had no recollection of it. But there was a lady that I knew that had worked there for many years, and she says, Jack, if you go downstairs, and the basement was, you had to crawl around, there's something up on top of some old file cabinets. She says, that might be what you're looking for. It was. And underneath the furnace, I even found the frame that we mounted it to. I took it home. My wife worked 2 solid days trying to clean it. And then I found out that 8 of the buildings were missing, but I was able to calculate how tall or how big they were by measuring the other buildings and knowing their dimensions. So I redid those, and here it is. And it's kind of interesting, especially some young people would come in and say, my dad worked in the drill room. Which one was that? Well, we could look at our corner of this print and look for drill room. Then we could go over and find out it was in building 22, for example. And they got a kick out of it knowing that their father or grandfather worked in that particular building. As we pass along here, there's one thing that is of a lot of interest to people, and that is the International Harvester whistle. The main whistle still blows today. Cook Manufacturing got a very, very large compressor and volunteered to blow the whistle, and they blow that whistle 2 times a day, and it makes people think of what was International Harvester, and we ran it with 300 horsepower of steam, and you could hear it down on the river or out to Weemutuck Country Club. That's how powerful it was. Now you can't hear that only here in town now, but we're very appreciative of the Oak people keeping our heritage. This was what might have been called the backup whistle. And the reason it was called the backup whistle, although it's about the same age as the main whistle, which was made at the same time as the whistle on the Lusitania that went down, started World War I. But this was about the same age, really, only much smaller. And so it was thought of as being the 8-minute whistle, and it would blow 8 minutes for the time that you were supposed to be at the plant, and then it would blow on the hour that you were supposed to be reporting to work. And this kind of interesting is that on the last day that we were going to work as a manufacturing unit, which would have been December 23rd, 1983, we decided that maybe I would give it to the mayor as a lasting token. When I went to the up on top of the powerhouse to retrieve it, it was gone. And somebody had taken it, apparently sometime prior to that. But on in 2018, on the eve of opening this museum, we got an anonymous telephone call 35 years ago, if you will, and they asked, where can we drop this off so that no one knows who had it? And we were able to do that, and so 35 years later, it returned to Canton and Canton's people for their heritage. This is the clock that was blown, that would tell the time and would reach up and get the handle and blow the whistle 7 times a day. Again, tell you had 8 minutes to get to your workstation, and so again, that's where they got the name 8-minute whistle. But this clock is an unusual thing. It controlled all the clocks within the plant, but the main thing about it is so put together so that it actually corrects itself. If it has gone too many ticks in motion, past a minute or 2 minutes, then you'll hear a clicking and it adjusts itself. So it's always accurate. To tell you how accurate it is, George Winship, a gentleman from Cuba, Illinois, who ran the powerhouse for many years, would call Philadelphia to the Bureau of Standards and ask what the time was. And then he would make sure his clock said the same thing. Kind of funny, over the years, it got so the people at the Bureau of Standards knew Mr. Winship, and they'd say, well, let's check our clock by yours today. That's how accurate it was. As we travel along here, there's a lot of pictures that people would enjoy coming in and seeing. For example, these I hung in my office for a number of years. They were in an old trunk in Fairview, Illinois, and when the lady died, she called a friend of ours and asked her if she wanted the contents of the trunk. And down at the bottom, under some newspaper, were these pictures. There are some interesting things about these pictures. It is the warehouse, which was the main 6-story, 4-story, and 6-story buildings along 3rd Avenue. And that's the pictures of them being built. If you had a real close look at this picture, it must have been hot that day, because every one of those masons has a straw hat on. Interesting in that the Parlin and Orndorff people were very enterprising, and they started the electrical plant and gas distribution center that eventually became the CIPS, or Central Illinois Public Service. This is the inside of their first building, and if you notice, some fancy windows. Legend has it that the wives said, this time build a building that looks nice instead of just an old gray thing sitting there. So this ended up having church windows and looked very nice. But it also provided steam to many of the buildings downtown through a system of tunnels. And I don't think, there's very few of those tunnels that exist today because they were filled in. I do know, I think where a couple of them still exist. But that's an interesting thing to see. Now let's talk about, how did International Harvester end up with Parlin and Orndorff? Well, Mr. Parlin came to Canton in 1840, and he was so talented that there was a fellow by the name of Colton who ran the blacksmith shop, and he hired Mr. Parlin, and he became a fast part of Mr. Colton's factory. And in fact, a few years later, he made him a partner in that operation. And then about in 1842, William Parlin married Caroline Orndorff. And later, when the plant used to grew like crazy, and there's need for more salespeople and more accountants and so on, Mr. Parlin didn't like that type of, he wanted to be in the factory working, inventing, and making sure everything that went out the door was to his standard. So about 7 years later, when the company became just too big for him to handle, he hired his wife's brother. So his brother-in-law became part of Parlin and Orndorff. And it remained that way for about 3 years and became Parlin and Orndorff, and Mr. Orndorff was a full partner. As I had mentioned, the Parlin and Orndorff Plow Works and its line of tillage equipment became, before the end of the 19th century, became the largest plow manufacturer in the world. And in Chicago, in the early 1900s, there were two major manufacturers, one McCormick and one Deering. They were both located in Chicago, and they decided to be a partnership, which they did. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to become the manufacturer of every piece of equipment that was made for farming. And of course that would have included the stuff that Parlin and Orndorff made. And when they looked around, there were big plow manufacturers, Chattanooga Plow Works, which made plows with chilled bottoms, which chilled bottom it's made in a sand casting, and a piece of iron is put in where the bottom of the plow will be, and it chills that section and makes it stronger. But Parlin and Orndorff had been, Mr. Parlin himself devised a all steel plow. Now, John Deere made the first one up in Detour, Illinois, but this one was not only all steel, it also had a patent on it which was kept at 38-degree angle on the plow bottom, and in effect the plow bottom, or the plow bottom was scoured all the time. What would happen is, as the dirt was picked up, it was ran up the concavity of the plow and pushed the other dirt off, so it was always clean. It was scoured itself. In addition, he made a double plow, one making a furrow this way, the other one doing just the opposite the other way. But anyway, it was McCormick Deerling had become International Harvester, and they made some inquiries to P&O Plow. And William Orndorff's grandson was named U.G. Orndorff, Ulysses Grant Orndorff. And he decided he would go to Chicago and talk to them about a sale of their manufacturing plant. And he did this. It's said that he wasn't a very impressive gentleman, that he was maybe less than 5'4" in height, and didn't seem to present anything that was out of the way of masculinity or anything. But anyway, he was a very intelligent gentleman, and a lot of people had a lot of respect for him. They used to say when he went into the Old Elks Hotel and went down the stairs after work, everybody became quiet and watched him come down the stairs, and so they could speak to him. He was apparently very impressive. He went to Chicago, got off the train, walked all the way to the big building that housed International Harvester. He went into the lobby, and they were looking for him, but they expected an entourage, but it was only Mr. U.G. Orndorff, who ended up upstairs, and he went into the boardroom, and they asked where his lawyers and so on were, because International Harvester had their bankers and their lawyers and the upper echelon of their employment. And Mr. U.G. Orndorff said, "I don't need those. I'm the one that's making the sale." So he opened his bookcase or briefcase, and he started in this sale program. When he left that day, he had sold the plant for $18.5 million. So he sold the plant, and he had two caveats that he said they had to do, they being International Harvester. One, all the accounts receivable would still belong to P&O. They agreed to that, no problem. But the next one was very interesting, and that is that they had to keep all of his employees until they died or retired or elected to leave on their own. They could not be let go in their lifetime. That was thinking of his people. So now the question is, Parlin and Orndorff no longer existed. It became International Harvester. International Harvester kept the Parlin name for 10 years, and it was 1929 before they eliminated the name Parlin and Orndorff. And they did that because they didn't want to lose any business, because everyone was happy with the Parlin and Orndorff product. And speaking of creditable product, International Harvester over the years became known as the company with as good a product as there was, or better than there was. There was no inferior product. They did at the end of their time have some engine problems. But what happened to them? Well, they were bought by J.I. Case, a big company, smaller than International Harvester, but it was owned by a big company called Tenneco out of Texas. What happened then to the International Harvester as we knew it, it was a terrible blow to the city. There was 2,600 people no longer employed by the city, a major cutback. A lot of homes were sold, a lot of businesses went out of business, if you will. Yeah, I was told many stories, which I won't repeat a lot of them here, but about some real problems it created for people or businesses in the town. Anyway, we recovered again. We're back. We're still alive. The Navistar, as a company became known as, still then owned the truck division. Now the truck division is no longer owned as a private stock individual because there was a company in Europe that is not a stock company, but a privately owned company that now owns and operates, if you will, Navistar, the truck division. And now that company is owned by Volkswagen. And so they have a pretty good chance of existing for a long time. It's really interesting, the people who used to buy the trucks, there was different names put on them, and those people who were used to the International trucks said to the company, bring the International name back. And International trucks are going up and down the road today. That's about all I can tell you now, but you'll learn more as these series as we go along, and I hope you enjoy this presentation.